Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to look at the Bitcoin price action, and we have a triangle formation on an RSI that's going to tell us when Bitcoin will make the next move by the specific date. But before we do that, we need to understand that over the last year, right, minus the last 2 or 3 months, Bitcoin has predominantly been driven upwards by the ETF narrative, okay? It's the ETF narrative on Bitcoin that, made a surge in price action from September 2023 all the way to the top here in March 2024. The ETF speculation, people thinking the ETF was coming, people buying because the ETF was coming, and then all of a sudden the ETF actually came out. We saw a quick little flush downwards, obviously, and then the price surged to the upside as the ETF buying ensued. But now, unfortunately, like we expected, the ETF narrative is weakened, well, partly because it's old news, right? It's been out for a few months now. There's not as much novelty around it anymore. Everyone's heard it 15,000 times. And partly, of course, because it's actually slowed down. If we look at the ETF volume, right, for example, we look at the volume on ETF inflows, which is the buying and even the net inflows we'll look at in a second. It's just been steadily declining for about 2 months now. It's back to levels we saw in January or February, right? So very low levels of ETF volume right now. And actually, the ETF volume, especially in the last month specifically, has actually been mostly negative. In fact, if we take the entire ETF net inflows over the last month and weigh it out, we'll see it's basically flatlining. There's basically been no positive effect on the price action from ETF inflows at all. So the ETF narrative currently, it may resurge, it may come upwards again, but the narrative itself is basically dead. And I've always said this, guys. I've always said this, and you'll recall me saying this from previous videos. Part of the ETF narrative, and the reason why it was so strong was the actual ETF buying itself, but part of it was the fact that it was a narrative, okay? It was the idea in people's head. People were, the Bitcoin price wasn't moving upwards necessarily because people were buying Bitcoin through an ETF. Maybe that was a small reason. But the main reason the Bitcoin price is moving upwards is because people were buying through the ETF, okay? People who weren't using the ETF were reacting to the ETF buying, thinking, oh, that's amazing, and they buy more. But right now, that narrative effect, which is probably much stronger than the actual effect in reality of the ETF buying itself, it has diminished. It's fallen off completely. I hope that makes sense. I want to explain it one more time just so it does, okay? There's 2 elements to why the price moved upwards under Bitcoin ETFs. One of them is the actual buying itself that comes from ETFs, and one of them is people buying because people are buying the ETFs, okay? It's the narrative argument. That's fallen off completely, and at least in the short-term level, the reality of ETF buying has fallen off completely as well. So Bitcoin right now, quite frankly, needs a new narrative. Now, that ETF narrative might come back, that's for sure. I know, for example, in Australia and other countries as well, ETF applications are going to be approved later this year, potentially. But I don't think that's going to be enough. I think the novelty is mostly worn off. And again, it might come back. But for the most part, I think Bitcoin does need a new narrative. And that new narrative has always rested within the 4-year cycle. The 4-year cycle has always been the main narrative of Bitcoin. There's always been alternative events like adoption and all this kind of thing. But for the most part, it's just been the halving, regular cyclical theory. And right now, of course, we know for a fact that Bitcoin has moved a little bit too fast. It moved upwards because of the ETF narrative. That was one of the reasons, rather than because of the cyclical narrative. And that's why it moved faster than usual. For example, it's usually taken Bitcoin about 1,100 days to break all-time highs. Okay, that happened on 2 occasions of the last 2 cycles. And then this time it only took 850 days. So Bitcoin moved upwards about 200 days earlier than expected. And that was, again, probably because of the ETF narrative, or at least partly because of the ETF narrative. So now Bitcoin is kind of lurking higher than it's meant to be, faster than it's meant to be. It's kind of waiting around. It's waiting for the next, factor to drive Bitcoin to the upside. And I think personally that narrative won't come from the ETFs. I think it will come from regular cyclical structure or regular structural market patterns, such as what I discussed yesterday. Now, in yesterday's video, I highly recommend you go watch it. I discussed how Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as a whole, based on structural market patterns that aren't necessarily related to date ranges, is basically on the verge of the next parabolic move. Now, when I say on the verge, that doesn't mean we can't go downwards anymore. It means that, if we're talking macro scale within the next month or 2, this will be occurring. That's what it means. It doesn't mean we can't we can't drop downwards 10%. No. It's not that specific. It's a broad analysis. And the broad analysis is this. Let me just outline it quickly. we had a 5-step kind of trend here in the last cycle for the total 3 cryptocurrency market cap chart. Step 1 was bottoming out. Step 2 was an impulse to the upside. Step 3 was after a higher low was formed, we came upwards for consolidation on top of the bull market support band. Let me bring that up. Step 4 was another move to the upside and a second and final consolidation before entering a parabolic bull market and altcoin season. And step 5 was breaking the previous all-time high. We are right now at step 4, okay? And what is step 4? Just to clarify, step 4, again, is the final consolidation before a parabolic bull market and breaking all-time highs, okay? Same thing can be said about the Ethereum chart, except the Ethereum chart, in my opinion, has an 8-step trend. Again, we are on step 7 of that 8-step, okay? So we're on step 4 of 5, and we're on step 7 of 8. Basically, we are on the brink on a macro scale of entering a parabolic bull market according to these historical date range trends. Now, this shouldn't necessarily be taken as a prediction. Now, of course, I do think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency will enter a parabolic bull market. I'm heavily bullish in the market, but I'm just observing here. What I'm observing is we clearly have date range trends. We clearly have structural trends, and we are clearly on the edge of completing those structural trends, which would entail a bull market. Meaning that if we did not do that, if we did go downwards, we'd easily be able to identify that as a fault within the structural trend, as a deviation, and get the hell out of the market. And if it did play out as planned, awesome. We already knew that was going to happen. So that's the beauty of just observing. You get to see what's going to happen. You get to see what should happen. And if it doesn't happen, you can minimize your losses. And if it does happen, cool, you already planned that. You already planned for that situation. Okay, so the trend's your friend until it ends. Currently, the trends are very bullish. Currently, the trend suggests there is a parabolic impulse coming very shortly on a macro scale. And so we know that, this could be the narrative that will drive cryptocurrency to the upside. That might fill the gaping hole left by the lack of ETF narrative right now, okay? Regular cyclical structural trends could come back, have a resurgence in popularity, and drive that, be the driving force of the next cryptocurrency move to the upside, okay? That's what I'm kind of looking at right now. Now, obviously everyone knows I'm macro bullish by now. I really just wanted to kind of establish that the ETF narrative has died off a little bit, and ETFs aren't really doing much right now. Many of you would already know that just based off personal experience of not hearing about ETFs that much anymore. The novelty's died off. That's quite simple. So now I'm kind of relying on these old structural trends, and I do think it's actually beneficial if cryptocurrency does follow them instead of following these new things like the ETF narrative, which have no historical data to give us really any guidance at all. I hope, generally speaking, I actually hope Bitcoin returns to establish cyclical trends, but we'll have to wait and see in that regard. I just wanted to analyze that. Okay, now that we've kind of gone through that, we can do a quick little Bitcoin analysis here. I don't know how useful you guys would have found that information. I think it's just more interesting rather than useful, but I certainly think it's interesting. But as for Bitcoin, Bitcoin right now, we have a fresh chart here. I'll analyze it with you right now. I'm going to draw in 4 critical lines here to this chart, and then I'm going to draw in a triangle on the RSI that's going to show you when Bitcoin will move by, okay, which is very important. I don't think many people have seen that triangle. 12-hourly chart on Bitcoin right now. Let's start by drawing in a line at the all-time high. So we have a line here at the all-time high. We'll make it red. We also have a line here at 57K. Now, the reason we draw a line at 57K is very simple. 57K is the next major macro support zone underneath the current range. So we look at the volume profile on the weekly chart. Where do we see a spike? We see it at 57K. The current range stops around 61. Therefore, 57 is kind of our next support zone underneath the current range. Now, where is the current range? The current range stems from a base of 61.3K, which actually comes from the monthly candle all-time high in 2021, and also a major support zone right now. So if we go ahead and draw in 61.3K on the short-term chart in yellow, which again is that monthly candle level, we can see that's very clearly the base of this range. And 73K, of course, is the top of the range, but another important level within the range is actually 69K. And 69K, if we go to the weekly chart, is the weekly chart all-time high in 2021, and a weekly chart resistance and support zone that's been acting very importantly over the last couple of months. So we've got a couple of lines here. Let's just briefly recap. The all-time high in here, 69K weekly chart level, 61K roughly, which is a monthly chart level, and then 57K, which is the nearest support zone below the current range. So The reason why I've drawn these 4 lines is very simple. I've drawn them and I've color-coded them in a way to make it very easy to understand for you. If Bitcoin drops below this line at 61K, we will go to 57K. If Bitcoin breaks above 69K, we will go to 74K and break all-time highs. Very, very simple, okay? That's why I've color-coded it. The yellow lines act as trigger lines, so once we pass them, the scenario is activated. In this case, it would be a bullish scenario. In this case, it will be a bearish scenario. As for right now, I'm mostly neutral on the short and medium term. I'm simply waiting and observing. Right now, I'm kind of taking a break from Bitcoin TA. I'm simply waiting for 61K to break or 69K to break, and then I will return to Bitcoin TA. But what I can tell you is this, and this is very interesting, is we can bring up the RSI. And as per my most recent Bitcoin predictions, we used the 12-hourly chart RSI, and it was very useful actually. What we did is we drew in a very important support line here on the 12-hourly chart RSI. We identified that support line. When that support line broke downwards over here on the 13th or 12th of April, we entered a short, a bit, essentially. We shorted the market. That breakdown occurred again over here around 69 to 70K, and that breakdown took Bitcoin downwards around 15%. To around 59K, okay? So what that proves to us is that the 12-hourly chart RSI is a very reliable chart for this price range. We've had a validation for that. A 15% drop based on a line breaking down on the 12-hourly chart RSI is very much validation of the 12-hourly chart RSI being very much accurate. And right now there is a new structure forming on 12-hourly chart RSI, which is great to see because we already know it's a valid form of analysis for this current range. And we've got a support line right here. Okay, and we've got a resistance line right here. Now, what does this show us? It shows us that Bitcoin is reaching an apex within this RSI triangle at around the 20th of May, meaning that by the 20th of May, and most likely, probably within the next week, if I'm honest, right? This range is going to get too tight. Probably within the next week, Bitcoin will be making a decisive move outside of this 12-hourly chart RSI triangle, either to the upside and to the downside. And when that occurs, I will be able to take a short-term bullish or bearish bias on Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin, for example, in the 12-hourly chart RSI breaks out to the upside of this triangle, I will be bullish on short-term on Bitcoin, and I would expect Bitcoin to go to new all-time highs, most likely. And if Bitcoin breaks down here, I would expect 57K. So a very, very useful triangle there. So rather than just waiting for these yellow lines to break, we can actually look at this triangle on the 12-hourly chart RSI, which we know is valid based on the last breakdown, and we can react based on that and adjust our positioning in the market based on that. It's very, very important stuff there. So it's been a very insightful video, I think. Discussed the narrative structures, discussed how Bitcoin will find the momentum to see the next move, and discussed this very important RSI triangle here in the 12-hourly chart. Hope you guys have found it useful. Thank you for watching. If you appreciated the video, go ahead and check out the BingX and BitGet exchanges, which are the advertised exchange on this YouTube channel. The referral links are down below, guys. With those referral links, you can click on those links, sign up to those exchanges, and get 15% trading fee discounts off the bat with my links, as well as literally thousands of dollars available in the reward center by completing various tasks. Again, that's exclusively with my links, so go ahead and do that. Both very cheap exchanges, both very cheap exchanges, very reliable, never been hacked before. Check them out. Crypto Academy. If you want to learn how to trade, this is how you can do it. There's a course here, the Become a Trader 10-unit course, preparing people for the bull market quite literally by teaching them how to trade so they can take advantage of it for themselves. Again, it's a bull market sale, so now's the time to get into that course. If you're interested, you can read all the information necessary on the website. And then finally, we have the VIP group on Telegram where we trade altcoins we trade altcoins 4 to 5 times a week with a 77% win rate, okay? So 25 wins, 9 losses in the most recent quarter, but we've had about 150 trade activations with, again, a 77% win rate. It's been very profitable over the long term. Check it out, guys, if you're interested. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next video. Cheers.